30 most handsome actors of the 80s and 90s. You won't believe how they look in 2026. At number 30, Pierce Brosnan. If Hollywood ever needed to cast the most effortlessly debonair man alive, Pierce Brosnan was the answer. Irish-born, impossibly suave, with dark hair, piercing eyes, and a smile that made the word charming feel inadequate. When he stepped into the role of James Bond in GoldenEye in 1995, the entire world exhaled. At 72 years old in 2026, Pierce Brosnan has grown into one of Hollywood's most distinguished silver foxes. Still charming, still debonair. Number 29, Andy Garcia. Dark, smoldering, and carrying the kind of quiet intensity that made every scene he walked into more interesting. Andy's Latin elegance was something Hollywood rarely produced, a natural, understated handsomeness that didn't need to announce itself. His role as Vincent Corleone in The Godfather Part 3 in 1990 remains one of cinema's great brooding performances. At 69 years old, Andy Garcia carries that same quiet dignity, silver-templed and still sharp. Number 28, Idris Elba. Few men have ever carried themselves with the natural magnetic authority of Idris Elba. Even in his earliest roles in the late 90s, it was immediately clear this man was built differently. Tall, broad, with a voice like rolling thunder and eyes that could hold an entire story. His iconic role as Stringer Bell in The Wire made him a global phenomenon. At 53 years old in 2026, Idris Elba is widely regarded as one of the most attractive men on the planet. No argument here. Number 27, James Spader. James Spader had a look that was completely his own, blonde, slightly dangerous, with an aristocratic intensity that made him irresistible as both hero and villain. In Pretty in Pink in 1986, he played the antagonist and half the audience was still rooting for him. Mysterious, intelligent, utterly unique. At 66 years old, James Spader has leaned fully into his distinguished, silver-haired era, and it suits him extraordinarily well.
Number 26, Alec Baldwin. In the late 80s and early 90s, Alec Baldwin was one of the most striking men in Hollywood. Dark hair, sharp jaw, broad shoulders, and an intensity that commanded every frame he occupied. His performance in The Hunt for Red October in 1990 announced him as a serious, bankable star. At 67 years old, Alec Baldwin remains a powerful, recognizable presence, one of Hollywood's most distinctive faces across 5 decades.
Number 25, a very special tribute to Val Kilmer. We lost Val Kilmer in 2025, and with him, one of the most breathtakingly handsome faces Hollywood ever produced. In the 1980s and 90s, Val Kilmer was pure cinema gold. His Iceman in Top Gun was smoldering perfection. His Jim Morrison in The Doors was haunting. His Batman, his Doc Holliday in Tombstone. We remember him as he was unforgettable and forever young on that silver screen. Rest in peace, Val. Number 24, Daniel Day-Lewis. Few actors have ever combined raw, almost feral handsomeness with the kind of transformative brilliance that Daniel Day-Lewis brought to every role. In The Last of the Mohicans, in 1992, he ran through the wilderness with long, dark hair and wild eyes and created one of cinema's great romantic images. 3 Academy Awards, 0 compromises, total legend. At 68 years old and largely retired from acting, Daniel Day-Lewis remains a uniquely striking, distinguished figure. Number 22, Jeff Goldblum. Unconventional, electric, and completely impossible to ignore. Jeff Goldblum carved out his own unique lane of Hollywood handsomeness. Tall, lanky, with those extraordinary eyes, and that singular way of moving through a scene like jazz made human. Jurassic Park in 1993 made him a global icon and a generational crush. At 73 years old, Jeff Goldblum has somehow become even more fascinating. Silver-haired, eccentric, and more adored than ever. Number 21, Lawrence Fishburne. Powerful, magnetic, commanding from his very first frame. Lawrence Fishburne brought an intensity to every role that was matched by a striking, authoritative physical presence. From Boys and the Hood, to What's Love Got to Do With It, to The Matrix, he was always the most compelling man in the room. At 64 years old, Lawrence Fishburne remains one of Hollywood's most respected and magnetic presences. Number 20, Wesley Snipes. Athletic, razor-sharp, and radiating a cool that very few actors have ever matched. Wesley Snipes, in the late 80s and 90s, was a force of nature, lightning fast, intensely handsome, and completely electrifying on screen. As Blade in 1998, he redefined the action hero entirely. At 63 years old, Wesley Snipes is making a powerful comeback, and that iconic cool, it never went anywhere. Number 19, Tom Hanks. Perhaps the most beloved man in Hollywood, Tom Hanks proved that boy-next-door warmth and natural charm could be just as powerful as any chiseled jaw. His open, honest, expressive face was the most trustworthy in cinema. Forrest Gump, Philadelphia, Castaway. An unmatched legacy. At 69 years old, Tom Hanks remains America's most cherished actor. Some faces simply get better with every passing year. Number 18, Mickey Rourke. In the mid-1980s, Mickey Rourke was arguably the most dangerous-looking, magnetically handsome man in Hollywood. That jaw, those eyes, that barely contained intensity. His performance in 9.5 Weeks in 1986 made him a global sensation. At 73 years old, Mickey Rourke's journey has been remarkable and complex. But nobody who saw him in his prime will ever forget what he looked like at the height of his powers. Number 17, Dwayne Johnson. The 1980s had many heartthrobs, but Dwayne Johnson was the one who defined an entire aesthetic. Stubble, pastel blazer, no socks. The look of Miami Vice became the look of a decade. Sun-kissed, impossibly cool, and effortlessly handsome. At 76 years old, Dwayne Johnson has grown into a distinguished, silver-haired gentleman. But that mischievous charm never left his eyes. Number 16, Kurt Russell. There is a particular kind of American handsomeness that feels timeless, rugged, warm, and completely unforced. That was Kurt Russell throughout the 80s and 90s. Whether he was playing a renegade outlaw or a hockey hero, he brought an effortless cool that made every role feel authentic. At 74 years old, Kurt Russell, with his silver hair and that same easy grin, looks like exactly who he always was. A genuine, original Hollywood man. Number 15, Arnold Schwarzenegger. In the 1980s, Arnold Schwarzenegger represented something Hollywood had never quite seen. A physical specimen so extraordinary that he became his own genre. Beyond the muscles, there was a charisma and screen presence that was impossible to manufacture. The Terminator, Predator, Total Recall, each one a monument. At 78 years old, Arnold Schwarzenegger remains one of the most recognizable human beings on the planet. Still formidable, still iconic. Number 14, Sylvester Stallone. Raw, intense, built like a sculpture. Sylvester Stallone turned his body and his determination into a Hollywood legend across the entire decade of the 80s. Rocky, Rambo, the embodiment of masculine resilience. At 79 years old, Stallone is still training, still creating, and still one of the most compelling action icons in cinema history. We are exactly halfway through, and I promise you, the men coming up in our top 10, they are on an entirely different level. Right now, drop a comment with the name of the actor you think deserves the number 1 spot. We read every single one. And if this video is giving you all the nostalgia, hit that like button right now. It means the world to us. Top 10, here we go. Number 13, Rob Lowe. In 1983, Rob Lowe appeared in The Outsiders and instantly became the face of a generation's dreams. Dark hair, blue eyes, and a smile so perfectly constructed it seemed almost unfair. He was the quintessential 80s heartthrob, clean, bright, and luminously handsome. At 62 years old in 2026, Rob Lowe is universally cited as one of Hollywood's greatest examples of aging flawlessly. The man simply does not age. Number 12, a loving tribute to Patrick Swayze. We lost Patrick Swayze in 2009 far too soon, far too young. The image of him in Dirty Dancing in 1987, athletic, smoldering, romantically devastating, is permanently burned into the cultural memory of an entire generation. Nobody puts Patrick Swayze in a corner. Nobody ever could. We remember him with nothing but love, admiration, and gratitude for every moment he gave us on screen. Forever one of the most beautiful men Hollywood ever knew. Number 11, Antonio Banderas. Spain gave Hollywood one of its greatest gifts when Antonio Banderas arrived in the early 1990s. Dark eyes that smoldered, a voice like warm velvet, a smile that could disarm anyone in any language. His chemistry with Salma Hayek in Desperado in 1995 was pure cinematic fire. At 65 years old, Antonio Banderas has aged into one of cinema's most distinguished silver foxes, and that accent is still as devastating as ever. Number 10, George Clooney. If the dictionary needed a photograph next to the word distinguished, it would be George Clooney. He arrived on RA in 1994 with dark hair, a jaw that defied geometry, and a warmth and intelligence that made every person watching feel personally charmed. He went on to become one of Hollywood's greatest leading men and the world's most famous silver fox. At 64 years old, George Clooney remains the gold standard of masculine elegance in Hollywood. Number 9, Keanu Reeves. Dark, brooding, and carrying a quiet melancholy that made him uniquely magnetic, Keanu Reeves has always been a different kind of Hollywood handsome. In Speed in 1994, he was all action intensity. In Much Ado About Nothing, he was unexpectedly poetic. And then came The Matrix in 1999, and Keanu Reeves became something beyond a movie star. At 61 years old, Keanu Reeves looks almost identical to how he looked 30 years ago. There is genuinely no explanation for this. Number 7, Kevin Costner. All-American in the most cinematic sense possible. Tall, square-jawed, with warm eyes and an easy, natural handsomeness that felt like it belonged on the American prairie as much as on a Hollywood set. The Bodyguard in 1992 made him one of the most desired men on the planet. At 71 years old, Kevin Costner has experienced one of Hollywood's great second acts through Yellowstone, reminding a whole new generation why he was always a legend. Number 6, Mel Gibson. In the early 1980s, Mel Gibson had a face that cameras simply loved: dark hair, electric blue eyes, an easy grin, and a rugged charm that radiated off the screen. Lethal Weapon in 1987 made him one of the biggest action stars in the world. At 70 years old, Mel Gibson's silver-haired, bearded current look carries a weathered gravitas that is entirely its own kind of compelling. Number 5, Richard Gere. Silver hair, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that carried a worldly, knowing warmth. Richard Gere was Hollywood's most sophisticated leading man throughout the 80s and 90s. An Officer and a Gentleman, Pretty Woman, Chicago. Each role a masterclass in how to make an entire audience fall completely in love. At 76 years old, Richard Gere is still one of the most naturally elegant men Hollywood has ever produced. A genuine, timeless icon. Number 4, Denzel Washington. There are handsome men. And then there is Denzel Washington, who operates on a level entirely his own. From the moment he appeared in Glory in 1989, it was clear that Hollywood had someone of extraordinary, 2 Academy Awards, a career of uncompromising excellence, and a face that seems to get more powerful with every passing year. At 71 years old in 2026, Denzel Washington is still the most commanding man in any room he walks into. Number 3, Johnny Depp. Dark, brooding, poetic, and impossibly beautiful, Johnny Depp in the early 1990s was like a romantic novel come to life. Edward Scissorhands in 1990 showed the world a sensitivity and vulnerability wrapped in extraordinary physical beauty. At 62 years old, Johnny Depp carries the weight of a complex journey, but that singular, unconventional magnetism, it never truly fades. Number 2, Brad Pitt. When Brad Pitt appeared in Thelma and Louise in 1991, he was on screen for barely 10 minutes. By the time the movie ended, he was the most talked about man in Hollywood. Blonde, sun-kissed, with a jaw and a smile that seemed engineered by Hollywood itself, Brad Pitt became the defining male beauty of the 1990s. Fight Club, 7. Legends of the Fall, each one iconic. At 62 years old, Brad Pitt has grown into a distinguished, silver-tinged era of his career, and our number 1 most unbelievably handsome actor of the 80s and 90s, Tom Cruise. In 1986, Tom Cruise put on aviator sunglasses, climbed into a fighter jet, and became the most famous man on planet Earth. But it wasn't just Top Gun, it was risky business before it. Rain Man after it. Jerry Maguire. Mission Impossible. Decade after decade, role after role, Tom Cruise remained the singular definition of a Hollywood movie star. That smile, that energy, that relentless, all-consuming commitment to being extraordinary. And at 63 years old in 2026, he is still running, still jumping off buildings, still doing every stunt himself, still impossibly defiantly Tom Cruise. There has never been anyone quite like him, and there never will be again. The 1980s and 90s gave us something truly irreplaceable. A generation of men whose handsomeness was matched only by their talent, their ambition, and the indelible mark they left on cinema forever. They made us believe in heroes. They made us dream bigger. They gave us memories we still carry with us today. Which of these incredible men is your number 1? Leave his name in the comments right now. We want to know. And if this video brought back some wonderful memories, give it a like. Share it with someone who grew up loving these legends, and subscribe, because we have so many more incredible videos coming very soon. Until next time, keep celebrating the legends.